What would you do if the person everyone called a traitor was the only one worth saving? Lieutenant Marcus Chen stared at the broken form of Commander Lyra Vex sprawled across the battlefield debris, her silver hair matted with dust and alien blood. Those distinctive pointed ears, the only giveaway that she wasn't entirely human. And every fiber of his training screamed at him to walk away, like everyone else had already done. The retreat sirens wailed across the shattered remains of forward base Artemis, and he could see his unit disappearing into the evacuation shuttles, their backs turned on the alien coalition officer who'd been accused of transmitting tactical data to the enemy just hours before the devastating attack that killed 43 human soldiers. Lyra's luminescent skin flickered weakly in the smoke-filled air, her legs completely motionless from where the collapsed structure had crushed her spine. And those expressive violet eyes that had once commanded respect from every species in the United Defense Coalition now held nothing but resignation as she watched Marcus hesitate. "Go," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant explosions. "I would not have saved you either." That single sentence made Marcus's decision for him. Because anyone who expected to be abandoned that casually had been betrayed far too many times already. And he joined the military to protect people, not to participate in mob justice based on fear and circumstantial evidence. He sprinted toward her position as another explosion rocked the compound, ignoring the crackling voice of Captain Morrison in his come, demanding his immediate return. His boots crunching over shattered glass and twisted metal as enemy artillery crept closer to their coordinates. Marcus dropped to his knees beside Lyra and immediately assessed her injuries with the field medic training he'd barely paid attention to during basic. Noting the unnatural angle of her lower body, the way her fingers trembled as shock began setting in, the shallow, rapid breathing that indicated internal damage. He couldn't see. "You're certifiably insane," Lyra managed, trying to sound commanding even as pain cracked through her words. "I'm paralyzed and probably dying. And you'll be court-martialed for desertion if you don't leave right now." Marcus ignored her and popped open his emergency medkit, pulling out the spinal stabilizer that looked woefully inadequate for the task ahead. "Yeah, well, I've been called worse by better people," he muttered, carefully sliding his arms under her shoulders. "And something tells me you didn't betray anyone, because a real traitor would have evacuated before the attack, not led the defense of Section 7 until the roof literally fell on her." He felt Lyra's body tense at his words, saw something flicker across her face that might have been hope, or might have been anguish. And then she was gripping his tactical vest with surprising strength for someone who'd lost all feeling below her waist. "The transmission codes," she said urgently, her accent some melodic combination of her native Celestian language and learned English becoming more pronounced with stress. "They were sent from my terminal, but I wasn't the one who sent them. Someone with high-level access framed me, Marcus. Someone who knew exactly how to make it look authentic." The use of his first name startled him because they'd only spoken a handful of times before this moment. Brief exchanges during joint operations where her tactical brilliance had saved his squad twice. And he'd noticed things about her that went beyond her obvious alien heritage, the way she always checked on wounded soldiers regardless of their species. How she took responsibility for every loss, even when the mission succeeded. That peculiar habit she had of humming an unknown melody when she thought no one was listening. Marcus activated the spinal stabilizer, watching it form a rigid electromagnetic field around her damaged vertebrae, knowing it was a temporary measure at best. "Then we'll prove your innocence," he said firmly. "But first we need to not die in the next 5 minutes." He hoisted her onto his back in a modified fireman's carry, distributing her weight carefully to avoid further injury. Feeling the unnatural limpness of her legs against his sides, the way her arms locked around his neck with desperate strength. The evacuation shuttles were gone now, dust trails marking their escape into the ash-clouded sky. And Marcus's come exploded with final warnings before Morrison cut his signal entirely. The silence marking his official abandonment by the coalition forces. "There's an emergency bunker," Lyra breathed against his ear, her voice growing weaker. "Section 12, beneath the old communications array. It has medical equipment, supplies, and a quantum-encrypted terminal that can't be remotely accessed. If I can reach it, I might be able to trace the real transmission source." Marcus adjusted his grip and started moving, every step jarring, despite his efforts to stay smooth. following Lyra's whispered directions through the labyrinth of destruction that had been a functioning military base 6 hours ago. Enemy drones buzzed overhead, their scanning beams cutting through the smoke, and he pressed them both against a half-collapsed wall as a patrol of Krell shock troops marched past, their insectoid forms clicking and chittering in their harsh language. He felt Lyra's breath catch, felt her trying to make herself smaller against his back despite her condition. And he realized with sudden clarity that she was terrified, not of dying, but of being the reason he died too. "Why are you really doing this?" she whispered once the patrol passed, and there was something raw in the question, something that suggested she genuinely couldn't comprehend someone choosing to help her. Marcus didn't have a simple answer because he barely understood it himself. Maybe it was the principle of innocent until proven guilty. Maybe it was the memory of how devastated she'd looked when her own second-in-command had accused her of treason. Maybe it was something about the way she'd still tried to coordinate the evacuation even after everyone turned on her, ensuring every soldier got out safely, even as they spat her name like a curse. "Because everyone deserves one person who believes in them," he finally said, "and right now, you've got me." The bunker entrance was sealed beneath rubble, and Marcus had to set Lyra down carefully against a support beam while he cleared the debris with his bare hands, ignoring the way his fingers split and bled, ignoring the approaching artillery sounds that meant the Krell were systematically destroying what remained of the base. Lyra watched him with an expression he couldn't quite read, her luminescent skin pulsing dimly like a dying star, and he saw her hand move to the sidearm at her belt, saw her weighing impossible calculations. "Don't even think about it," Marcus snapped, without looking up, because he'd seen that look before on soldiers who thought they were liabilities. "You pull that weapon for anything other than shooting enemies, and I'll be extremely annoyed after all this effort." A sound escaped Lyra that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "You truly are insane, Marcus Chen." He finally cleared enough rubble to access the manual override, yanking the emergency release that opened the bunker with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a stairway descending into darkness that his combat lights barely penetrated. Getting Lyra down those stairs was a nightmare of careful movement and suppressed cries of pain, every jostle potentially damaging her spine further, every second bringing enemy forces closer to discovering their location. The bunker was exactly as she'd described, a small emergency facility with a surgical pod, supply caches, and communication equipment that looked thankfully intact. Marcus lowered Lyra onto the surgical pod as gently as possible, watching its diagnostic sensors activate automatically. Holographic displays painting her injury in brutal detail: 3 crushed vertebrae, severed nerve connections, internal bleeding that the stabilizer was barely containing. The pod's AI spoke in a calm, clinical voice: "Patient condition critical. Paralysis complete from thoracic vertebra 7. Recommend immediate spinal reconstruction surgery. Warning: procedure requires species-specific surgical protocols. Celestian physiology detected. Appropriate medical protocols available, but success probability 63% without qualified surgeon." Lyra closed her eyes, and Marcus saw her accept the death sentence. In that probability, saw her preparing to face the end with whatever dignity she had left. "Well," she said quietly, "at least I won't die alone in the rubble." "Thank you for that gift, Marcus. Truly." Something fierce and stubborn ignited in Marcus's chest because he hadn't dragged her through hell just to watch her give up now. "The pod can walk me through it, right?" he demanded, already moving to the surgical controls, pulling up the Celestian medical database with shaking hands. "I'm not a surgeon," Lyra protested weakly. "You've never performed spinal reconstruction. You don't know Celestian neurological structures. Then you'll teach me," Marcus interrupted, stripping off his tactical gear and scrubbing his hands in the decontamination field. "Talk me through anything the AI gets wrong. Your brain still works perfectly, Commander. So start commanding." The next 4 hours were the longest of Marcus's life, a terrifying dance between the AI's instructions and Lyra's whispered corrections. His hands, guided by haptic feedback systems as he carefully reconstructed her shattered spine with bioprinted vertebrae and neural scaffolding that looked like delicate silver lace. Lyra stayed conscious through most of it, despite the pain, her voice growing hoarse as she explained the subtle differences between human and Celestian nerve clusters, how her people's enhanced regeneration would integrate the scaffolding, if he could just align it correctly. Stories about her homeworld's violet skies and singing forests that he suspected she told to keep herself from screaming. "You have surprisingly steady hands for someone who's terrified," she observed during a particularly delicate neural connection, and Marcus couldn't help the slightly hysterical laugh that escaped him. "I'm absolutely petrified," he admitted, "but you trusted me enough to let me try. So I'm going to trust myself too." Something shifted in the air between them during that exchange, some barrier dissolving. And Lyra began talking about more than just medical procedures, about the loneliness of being the only Celestian in the Coalition command structure, the pressure of representing her entire species, how she'd worked twice as hard as any human officer to earn half the respect, and how quickly that respect had evaporated the moment suspicion fell her way. Marcus listened while he worked, sharing his own stories about being the son of refugees who'd fled Earth's resource wars, growing up never quite Chinese enough for his relatives or American enough for his peers, joining the military to prove he belonged somewhere. They were both outsiders, he realized, both people who'd spent their lives trying to earn a place in a universe that seemed determined to keep them at arm's length. When the final neural connection was complete and the surgical pod began the delicate process of stimulating nerve regeneration, Marcus stumbled backward with exhaustion and relief, his hands trembling from 4 hours of microscopic precision. Lyra's eyes were heavy with the sedatives the pod had finally administered, but she reached for his hand and held it with surprising strength. "I felt that," she whispered, wonder breaking through the medical haze. "The last connection, I felt it in my legs, just for a second." Marcus squeezed her hand gently, something warm expanding in his chest that had nothing to do with medical success and everything to do with the extraordinary person before him. "Rest now," he said softly. "When you wake up, we'll figure out who really betrayed the base. And then we'll make them regret ever using you as their scapegoat." Lyra's eyes drifted closed, but not before Marcus saw something in them that looked dangerously like trust, like hope, like the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find in the middle of a war. While she slept, Marcus turned to the quantum encrypted terminal and began the painstaking work of tracing the treasonous transmission, following Lyra's notes and access codes through layers of security, his combat-trained mind adapting to the puzzle of digital forensics. 6 hours later, as Lyra stirred awake with the first tingling sensations of returning feeling in her extremities, Marcus had found what they needed: a hidden subroutine in the base's communication system, installed 3 weeks prior by someone with executive-level clearance, designed to perfectly mimic Lyra's access patterns and communication style. The digital signature was expertly concealed, but the timestamp on the installation gave them a narrow window of suspects, and the coding style itself was distinctive enough to trace to its creator. "It was Colonel Pravesh," Marcus said quietly, as Lyra pulled herself to sitting with the pod's assistants, her face showing cautious joy at each muscle response that proved her body was healing. "He was the only one with both the access and the expertise to create this kind of deep-fake transmission protocol. The question is, why?" Lyra's expression darkened, pieces falling into place behind those remarkable eyes. "The Meridian contract," she breathed. "3 weeks ago, I discovered irregularities in our supply chain, medical supplies and weapons being diverted from Coalition stocks. I reported it to Pravesh as my direct superior, asked him to help me investigate." Marcus pulled up financial records he'd found buried in Pravesh's encrypted files, showing systematic theft over 18 months, millions in resources sold to black market contractors, a fortune built on the backs of soldiers who went without proper equipment. "He needed you discredited before you could dig deeper," Marcus concluded. "When the Krell attacked, he saw the perfect opportunity to frame you and eliminate the evidence by letting the base be destroyed." Anger flickered across Lyra's features, but it was tempered by something sadder, the resignation of someone who'd been betrayed by people she trusted too many times before. "We have the evidence, but we're trapped in a bunker beneath enemy territory with no way to transmit it through the Krell's jamming fields," she pointed out. "Even if I can walk again in a few days, we can't exactly stroll through their occupation force." Marcus felt the weight of their situation settling over him, but before despair could take hold, an idea sparked. "The Krell didn't want this base for its strategic position," he said slowly, pulling up tactical maps. "They wanted the quantum relay in Section 4, the one that can punch signals through fold space directly to Coalition command without conventional transmission lag. If we could reach it and activate it for just 30 seconds, We could upload everything we found. Lyra studied the map, her tactical mind already calculating routes and probabilities despite her weakened state. The relay would have been their primary target. It'll be heavily guarded, probably booby-trapped. And I won't be combat ready for at least 72 hours, even with accelerated healing. She looked at Marcus directly, and he saw the internal war playing across her face, the desire to clear her name versus the refusal to risk his life further. You've already done more than anyone had the right to ask. You saved my life, helped me find the truth. If you take this evidence and find a way to escape alone, you could still salvage your career. Maybe even be celebrated for uncovering Pravesh's crimes. Marcus understood what she was offering an out. A chance to be the hero instead of the deserter. A logical choice that any sane person would take. He also understood that taking it would mean abandoning her again, leaving her to face whatever came next alone. And something fundamental in him rebelled against that possibility. Commander Vex, he said formally, then smiled slightly. Lyra, I didn't save you just to leave you behind in a bunker. We're seeing this through together. Or we're not seeing it through at all. The expression that crossed Lyra's face was complicated gratitude and exasperation and something tender that she quickly tried to hide. You're the most frustratingly honorable person I've ever met, she said, but her voice carried warmth that softened the words. Also, potentially the most tactically unsound. But I find I don't mind that as much as I should. Over the next 3 days, they planned their assault on the quantum relay while Lyra's body slowly healed. Sensation and movement returning in incremental victories that she celebrated with quiet determination. Marcus watched her push through the painful rehabilitation with unwavering focus, refusing to let her body's betrayal define her limitations. And he found himself admiring not just her strength, but her resilience, her sharp humor that emerged once she felt safe enough to lower her guard. The way she hummed that strange melody while working through physical therapy exercises. They talked during the long hours of preparation, sharing things that soldiers rarely shared, dreams beyond the war, memories of people they'd lost, fears they'd never voiced to anyone else. Lyra told him about Celesta's twin moons and the bioluminescent gardens where she'd played as a child, about choosing military service over the artistic path her family had expected, about the weight of being the first Celestian in Coalition Command and knowing that her failure would be attributed to her entire species. Marcus shared his own burdens, the pressure of honoring his parents' sacrifice by being perfect, the guilt of surviving battles where better soldiers had fallen, the loneliness of being surrounded by comrades, but never quite feeling like he belonged. You belong here, Lyra said quietly one evening as they checked their weapons for the 20th time. With me, in this moment. I hope you know that. Marcus looked at her. Really looked at her, not the alien commander or the accused traitor or even the patient he'd saved, but Lyra, this extraordinary person who'd trusted him with her life and her truth. I know, he said softly, and on impulse reached for her hand, feeling the slight luminescent warmth of her skin against his. She didn't pull away, instead threading her fingers through his with a gentle certainty that made his heart stutter. They stayed like that for a long moment. Two outcasts who'd found something unexpected in the worst possible circumstances. And Marcus knew with absolute clarity that whatever happened next, this moment mattered, she mattered, in ways he was only beginning to understand. The assault on the quantum relay was a desperate gambit that relied more on audacity than tactics, Marcus creating a diversion with the bunker's limited explosive charges while Lyra, still moving with careful deliberation to protect her healing spine, infiltrated through the maintenance tunnels she'd memorized during the base's construction. The Krell responded to the explosions exactly as predicted, their rigid tactical doctrine, pulling guards away from secondary positions, giving Lyra the narrow window she needed to reach the relay chamber. Marcus fought through the chaos with controlled precision, every shot counting as he took down sentries and disabled their communication nodes, his combat AI tracking Lyra's progress through their linked tactical displays. He saw her reach the relay, saw her hands flying across the controls as she initialized the fold space connection, saw the countdown timer. That would give them exactly 45 seconds of transmission time before the Krell's suppression systems adapted. He also saw the Krell shock squad converging on her position, saw that she'd never make it out before they arrived, saw her realize the same thing and keep working anyway, because getting the truth out mattered more than her own escape. Lyra, you need to move. Marcus shouted into the already sprinting toward her position, cutting down the Krell soldiers between them with desperate efficiency. Uploads at 70%, her maddeningly calm voice replied. And I'm not leaving before it's complete. Marcus burst into the relay chamber just as the upload hit 93% and a Krell warrior raised its plasma rifle toward Lyra's unprotected back. He didn't think, didn't calculate, just threw himself between them as the weapon discharged, feeling the searing impact against his armor as the shot meant for her took him in the shoulder instead. The force spun him around, but he stayed upright, returning fire and dropping the Krell, even as his arm went numb and the smell of burned flesh filled his helmet. Marcus. Lyra's anguished cry cut through the combat haze, and then she was there, supporting him as the upload completed at 100%. The relay sending their evidence package directly to Coalition Command in an unstoppable burst of quantum encrypted data. Now we move, Marcus gritted out, and together they fled through the maintenance tunnels as the relay chamber exploded behind them. Pravesh's crimes and Lyra's innocence now irrevocably part of the official record. They made it back to the bunker through sheer stubborn will. Lyra half carrying Marcus despite her own recent paralysis. His blood leaving a trail that, thankfully, the tunnel's environmental systems quickly sterilized. The surgical pod wasn't designed for human physiology, but Lyra overrode its protocols with desperate determination. Her hands steady as she treated his wounds with the same care he'd shown her, murmuring reassurances in her melodic language that he didn't understand but found comforting anyway. You jumped in front of a plasma rifle for me, she said softly, as the pod worked, her luminescent skin casting gentle light across his face. That was tactically unsound and strategically unnecessary and completely, utterly selfless. Marcus managed a weak smile through the pain medication haze. Well, I've invested too much effort in keeping you alive to let some crow ruin my work now. Lyra's laugh was slightly watery, and he realized with surprise that her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You impossible, wonderful human, she whispered. And then she was leaning down and pressing her forehead to his in what he instinctively recognized as a celestial gesture of profound affection and trust. Her silver hair falling around them like a curtain, creating a private world where only they existed. Marcus lifted his good hand to cup her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek, feeling the slight luminescence pulse under his touch. We made it, he said softly. Both of us together, Lyra echoed. And the word sounded like a promise, like the beginning of something neither of them had planned, but both of them wanted. Something worth surviving for beyond duty or honor or vindication. Coalition forces arrived 18 hours later, having received their evidence package, and immediately launched a rescue operation when they realized what Marcus and Lyra had accomplished. Colonel Pravesh was already in custody, his co-conspirators being rounded up. And Commander Vex's name was not only cleared, but celebrated as the officer whose integrity had exposed the largest corruption scandal in Coalition history. Marcus woke in a proper medical bay on the carrier Valiant Dream, his shoulder rebuilt and his service record marked with commendations instead of the court-martial he'd expected. And the first thing he saw was Lyra sitting beside his bed, her silver hair catching the light, those pointed ears, the only sign of her alien heritage. Everything else purely and remarkably herself. They want to give us medals, she said, with a slight smile, and I told them we'd accept only if we could return to active duty together. I hope you don't mind that I'm apparently impossible to get rid of now. Marcus reached for her hand, feeling the now familiar warmth of her luminescent skin, seeing the future spreading before them with unexpected clarity, more missions, more challenges, more moments of finding hope in impossible circumstances. All of it better because they'd face it together. Commander, I wouldn't have it any other way, he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Lyra's smile widened into something radiant and genuine, the expression of someone who'd finally found where she belonged, and she squeezed his hand gently. Neither would I, Lieutenant. Neither would I. 6 months later, they'd become the Coalition's most effective partnership, a team that understood trust and loyalty in ways that transcended species or protocol, and when people asked Marcus why, he'd risk everything to save a paralyzed alien warrior everyone else had abandoned. He always gave the same answer, because she was worth saving. And sometimes the most important mission is the one everyone else walks away from. And Lyra, standing beside him with quiet strength and that particular smile she reserved only for him, would add, And sometimes the person who steps forward when everyone turns their backs is the only person who truly matters, they'd found. Something rare in the chaos of war, not just vindication or survival, but genuine connection, the kind that transforms two outcasts into something stronger together than they ever could have been apart, and the universe was better for it.